Hello everyone and welcome back to another review, this time for Gamedec, an indie investigation cRPG or computer RPG game set in a cyberpunk setting developed by Anshar Studios. I believe that's how you pronounce it, from Poland, and released in 2021. Now, I played this game on PC via Steam, and I believe that's the only way to play this game as of now, which is interesting because in this day and age, games are released on as many different systems as possible, right? So, how did I decide to give Gamedec a chance? Well, after completing Disco Elysium, one of my favorite games of 2019, I was craving for another unique cRPG experience, and Gamedec seemed to steer me in that direction. Now, don't get me wrong, Gamedec does not come close to the greatness of Disco Elysium, and in my opinion, that's totally fine considering Disco Elysium is one of those, diamond in the rough type of masterpieces that every now and then surprise, everyone. Not every narrative-driven cRPG has to match or attempt to match the greatness of Disco Elysium, and Gamedec that stands out on its own just fine, in my opinion. So as long as you know how to keep your expectations in check, I think you guys will find Gamedec enjoyable. Now, story-wise, this game lets you create a character or play from a pre-made characters, but no matter what route you go to, you take the role of a Gamedec, which is short for game detective. You see, the game takes place in a futuristic, dystopian cyberpunk version of Warsaw, Poland, in which mankind has adopted virtual reality as a way of life. People get hooked to these machines that send them in virtual worlds, typically linked to games and things of that nature, where they can adopt a different persona, a different physical appearance, or a different physical virtual appearance, etc. So this type of virtual reality is so real that people can actually get injured or damaged if they abuse the virtual reality system. At any rate, you play the role of a Gamedec, and your first mission in the game, for example, deals with assisting a wealthy client that is one of the top dogs for this particular corporation, and he hires you to investigate his son's addiction to an adult game called Twisted and Perverted. As you all know, I don't want to really delve too much into the story section of games in my videos to avoid spoilers, but let me just say that throughout the game, you will be playing as the Gamedec character that you created, and you will be investigating different, both in the real world and as well as the virtual worlds. You'll be doing your detective work. For the most part, you will go to these virtual worlds, since all you are in the game is, you're a game detective after all. The story starts on the interesting side of things as you learn how the synergy between the real and virtual world exists. But it starts growing a bit tiring after a few hours, and kind of like in the middle of the game. However, I have to say that the late game has some very interesting plots, and again, I won't be spoiling anything, but I will just say that it's very much worth playing throughout the game, because the late game events, characters, and unfoldings are very, very interesting. It's one of those plots that personally I did not see coming, and so all I can say is I was pleasantly surprised and very happy with the outcome. After all, this is a narrative-heavy game, so it almost needs to have a strong story, and for the most part, the game delivers, with the saving grace being the late game. It's important to note that the game is actually based on a written series by a author called Marcin Sergius, I believe. But yeah, the game is based on existing written stories, so that's maybe where some of the strong plot points come from. Unfortunately, though, the indie nature of the game stands out in terms of some poor writing in certain segments of the game, including some minor typos and things of that nature. But again, as long as you keep your expectations in check, you will find enjoyment in the story of the game. Now, graphically, the game uses the Unreal Engine, creating 3D models and environments that are fairly good, but nothing earth-shattering. The game is presented in an almost isometric / high view in a typical cRPG fashion. And when dialogue occurs, certain characters have their kind of like 2D avatars or 2D backgrounds figures to go along with the dialogue boxes, which is very cool. But again, the indie nature of the game shows some shortcomings with certain NPCs that do not have a figure and instead are replaced by a black silhouette, which is a shame considering the artist that has drawn the avatar characters and backgrounds has done a pretty good job with the overall character design. Now, the art direction is great in the real world sections of the game, depicting a cyberpunk modern look, as I mentioned before. But there is also a nice contrast with the virtual worlds that you visit in the games, since they take place in all these fictitious game worlds that offer different sceneries that that range from a western cowboy themed game to mountainous regions and so forth. Most PCs should be able to play this game since it's not very demanding in the graphics department. Sound-wise, the game features a decent soundtrack. However, the sound department in this game is an area where a lot of people are kind of like very disappointed in terms of the game not having voice acting. I completely understand the situation since it can be very costly to have voices in the game, especially for an indie, smaller, studio like for this game. And I saw some comments from people in the community section of the Steam forums for this game where they are requesting this feature. Otherwise, they would not buy the game. So to me, that's a little bit too much, but I can understand also, where gamers are coming from, since voice acting in a cRPG is always a great thing, and even more so for a narrative-driven game like this one. Perhaps, in the future they can compromise and provide partial voice acting in key dialogue sections of the game, kind of like Disco Elysium did for, previous to releasing the final cut version of the game, which I believe features, fully voice acted segments. The intro of the game is the only section that I believe has voice acting for Gamedec, but during the proper game, there's no voice acting at all. Now, regarding the gameplay, as I mentioned before, the best way to describe this game is that it's an indie narrative-driven investigation cRPG. You will spend the vast majority of your time in this game talking to people as a detective, meaning that you will be seeing a lot of branching dialogue options. There are a few parts in the game where you take a break from the narrative nature of the game by solving puzzles, engaging in kind of like mini games, and some combat sequences here and there, but make sure you understand that there's literally no combat in this game and that you will be reading a ton. So both by talking to NPCs and by reading glossary type of documents that help expand the universe of the game, and all these documents are unlocked throughout the game, and especially as you interview the NPCs in the game, you have some background information that relate to the characters and the world itself. So I guess in this regard, this game is a lot like Disco Elysium in the sense that you will be reading a lot, and quite honestly, that's one of the features that drew me towards this game. I personally appreciate games that are a bit different and don't have to rely on combat systems all the time. As mentioned previously, you can create your own character or pick from a pre-made one. Since I purchased the deluxe version of the game, the DLC included that was included with the game had what is considered a true character, I guess, for this game, at least based on the Gamedec written series that I mentioned previously. It's a pre-made character called, I believe, Torquil Amor, and his stats focus towards the kind of like medicine knowledge, which is very interesting. So I decided to pick him to try something different because, typically, in games like this, cRPGs, half the fun is creating your own characters and developing traits and personality. But, some of the other builds that you can come up with in this game include being a programmer and other professions that are a little bit more common for this type of game and story. So the actual provided, pre-made character made sense to me, since it was a little bit different in the sense that it focused on kind of like medical knowledge, which I would have never picked that on my own if I'm being honest. All in all, the different professions that you can have in the game offer a skill tree section where, for example, you can expand your medical knowledge all the way to having kind of like surgeon level type of knowledge, or go from being a basic programmer all the way to being a hacker. You don't have to stick to a profession, and that's what I actually did in the game. I try to balance some of the profession skills, but I did end up putting a lot of points towards kind of like the influencer profession branch. since I love being able to persuade or influence NPCs characters with my charisma during the game. And this is a general rule for me whenever I play cRPGs or Western RPGs like the Bethesda games. I really like to have that persuasive nature, if you will. In order to upgrade the profession skill tree, you have to earn skills through dialogue, and depending on the type of character and personality that you forge in the game, you will earn specific attributes. So for example, if you're amicable or empathetic or a friendly, when you talk to NPCs and things of that nature, you will earn attributes that will better help you level up in the medic route and so forth. So if you're being techie with your answers, that will give you attribute points that will allow you to upgrade the kind of like the programmer or the hacker profession in the game and so forth. Now, I do wish the game did a little bit better job at guiding you with perhaps color-coded answers to indicate what type of attributes you would earn with your answers, since some of them are not as straightforward as one may think based on the dialogue of the game. Now, the other interesting gameplay element is the deduction section, where by investigating and interviewing NPCs, you gain clues that help you shape an opinion to make deductions on the cases you are hired for. The cool thing is that there is really no right or wrong way of going about this, and it's really based more on your perception of the cases you're involved, and also on how much clues you gather. If you're like me and you talk to every character and you go through every branching dialogue tree, the more you talk, the more information you gain. So the more you will be able to come up with like the true solution, if you will. With that being said, the deductions you make do shape the story of the game, and although the overarching story won't be drastically different, there are enough branching paths and endings to warrant subsequent playthroughs of the game just to see different things happen. Overall, Gamedec was an enjoyable cRPG to the point that it made my list for top games of 2021 at number 10, I believe. While I can't say most NPCs are memorable or the story was interesting enough to keep you hooked all the way to the end of the game, with likely around 15 hours, 12 to 15 hours in my opinion of playtime in your first playthrough, and then subsequent playthrough you can do much faster, trying to pick different options and so forth. If you're interested in a narrative driven cRPG, then this is worth checking out in my opinion, although I have to say that the price point can be a little bit steep considering it's in a smaller game on the shorter side. So maybe consider waiting for a sale to truly make it worth your while. So yeah, that's it for now. Hope you all enjoyed this video, and take care.